Welcome to the Living Farms podcast, where voices from around the world come together to shape the future of biodynamic agriculture.
Welcome back to the Living Farms podcast, where we are now exploring in our new season holistic agroecology in collaboration, in synergy with biodynamic agriculture. And today we have a guest of honor with us, Darren Doherty from Australia, who has been working for more than 30 years in different projects around the world in 6 continents, 50 countries, and more than 3,000 projects, and some of them in broad acre projects. So he has been able to experience in different parts of the world the work that he does. And the work that he does is related, among other things, I think, primarily in project design. And I invited Darren because I've had the possibility of collaborating with some of his students in different parts of the world. And we have been able to really do transdisciplinary work in different fields. And I find that this is an amazing collaboration for the future. We have to hold hands and appreciate the talents and the vision that other groups of people that are also loving the earth, doing everything they can for the development of the earth and the human beings. And we have to work together. So welcome, Darren. This is really amazing that you're here with us. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
So I would begin, Darren, by asking you, why is project design? How did you get into that? And why do you think it's so important for contemporary agroecology holistic projects?
Well, nothing in agriculture or ecosystems is disintegrated. So, just based on that and depending on your belief systems, you believe that there's either a creator and there's an intelligent design, or that there's evolution that's led to intelligent design. So either way, as my old friend David Holmgren, the co-originator of permaculture design, said, is that nature is an equal opportunity employer. So I would say that to extend to your question, agriculture must be interdisciplinary, and it must be to that degree have some conscious design around it. From my own relationship with biodynamics, it goes back to about 1988, 89. I was working in hospitality, and then I got a job running an organic greengrocer in my hometown in 1989. That's where I met my wife, and I was a buyer, so I was exposed to a host of Australia's, because our region of Southern Australia is a sort of a hotspot of organic and biodynamic agriculture. So, I knew Podolinsky, I knew Ian Lloyd. I had a very good relationship with Ian Lloyd in particular, who was a breakaway biodynamic farmer in the famous schism of biodynamics in Australia, and a bunch of other blokes, and mostly men at that time, and they all used some form of design, and part of that was because the Australian context is in biodynamics is very different to what it is in Europe. What I mean by that primarily is the scale. So even Podolinsky himself, I remember watching a video. He had a 5 video series, and one of them was stirring machines. And that's a version of design that wasn't in. There wasn't any mention in Steiner's agriculture of using any machines, especially recycled washing machine parts, to make these large scale stirrers, which then and then spread 500 out on areas of thousands and thousands of hectares. So, when project design takes a lot of different guises.
Yeah.
It's not just about how you situate everything out on a farm. It's how you actually make your job easier. And so, there was a practical, pragmatic element to the Australian biodynamic farmer, which I was an early witness to. And it certainly, I suppose what it said to me was that even though biodynamics is generally seen as a fairly strong methodology, even practitioners of that could work outside of that suit, if you like.
Yeah.
And that gave me pause as a young person to sort of go, oh yeah, well, if they can do it, why can't I? Plus, I grew up in a family which made things. My grandfather was a fitter and turner. My stepfather was a fitter and turner. My late father was a boiler maker. So I grew up with a lot of men and women who were very practical and could make things. So that extended, I suppose, to the possibility of how, when you have problems, or when you see problems aren't necessarily all that you're solving. Sometimes it's just trying to create a better opportunity to and efficiencies. And that's another thing that I don't think it's specific to Australian farmers. There's that great term, um, uh, uh, necessity is the mother of invention. And um, here in Australia and New Zealand, for that extent, there's a lot of innovative farmers because we don't get subsidies. There's no, you know, unlike Europe, 50% of the Australian farmers' income doesn't come from the EU. It comes from them selling things directly. That's it. So they're the least subsidised farmers in the OECD. So there's all of these things, plus the difficulties of our climate here in Australia, which lead us to trying to make agriculture work, because agriculture, it relies on reliability, whether it's pricing or whether it's soil conditions, whether it's the climate. And here in Australia, well, climate is definitely not regular. And I know that now in Europe and other places around the world, the climate is becoming less regular, and there's inconsistencies with pricing and all of that sort of thing, which means that farmers need to become more innovative and develop systems, farming systems, and layouts where things go that make things more reliable, at least from an infrastructure perspective. So that's sort of where we come from, and a bit of my backstory as well woven in.
Thank you. I think it's very important to connect how our biographies are tied to the work that we do and how relevant we are trying to solve our own enigma by helping others and developing our own skills at the same time. Um, I think project design is something very relevant, and you've taken it to a degree that is quite organized, quite clear, quite approachable, even though it's in a way, I wouldn't say complex, but it's rich in information. Would you tell us a little bit, would you run us through more or less how is your process of design? And you've designed a particular group and a particular work now called Rex and Regrarians. So I would welcome you if you could introduce our listeners to this idea that you've put forward in this way of designing and what it means.
Well, we started off being influenced mainly by biodynamics, Masanobu Fukuoka, and his work with the One Straw Revolution. And I see there's quite a lot of synergies between biodynamics and what Fukuoka was doing, at least spiritually. And then spiritually within agriculture, and trying to have the whole farm understand. So that concept of the whole farm was a really powerful one for me, and that came very early on from biodynamics and from Fukuoka, reading those people. And
Individuality of the farm organism. Yeah,
exactly. Yes, thank you. That's what I should have remembered that.
it's okay.
Yeah, so there's that. and then came along things like keyline, and I grew up on a landscape that had been influenced. Our farm had been influenced by keyline, the keyline plan, especially all of the water side of things.
Yeah.
And then I became interested in permaculture. So you've got these branches of agriculture, and so you've got Fukuoka biodynamics, which is more about the way a place is operated. That's like an operating system, if you like. And then you've got the hardware, which permaculture and keyline really deal with. What goes where. The design. It's very design centric. A lot of people call keyline design for that reason. So my early influences were those sort of 4 domains, if you like. And so for the first probably from 1993 when we started our business until 2011, I should say, I had work processes, but I didn't really have a meta process which I was following. I was searching for one, and there was one there that was sitting there in my face from day one, and that was the keyline scale of permanence, which I taught about a lot, and I talked about a lot, but it just didn't, just not. I wasn't smart enough to realize it was there. Until one day I did a course. I was invited to teach holistic management educators a course on land planning. And I was talking to the organizer, and he also taught land planning at TAFE, which is adult education here in Australia. Technical and further education is the term. Anyway, I said, how do you teach keyline? He said, I use the keyline scale of permanence. And it was like, it just needed someone to actually repeat what I already. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
I felt a bit dumb at that. I felt a bit stupid at that point. Anyway, so that was like, oh, really? No. 20 years has gone by, and
Yeah.
or whatever it was. And anyway, so that was very powerful, and I immediately looked at it. By that stage, if you look at the sort of influences that have methodological influences, I'd tacked on holistic management, which was again a whole farm organism kind of thinking, but very, very management focused. It's probably the most management focused of all of the methodologies in agriculture. And anyway, so I did put that in, and I was thinking, all right, well, how do I make the keyline scale of permanence more holistic? And what does permanence actually mean? And so I was contending with those things. And so I added on to the 8 factors of the scale of permanence, economy, and energy. Because I thought, all right, from a scale of permanence perspective, if I go through it, Yeoman's scale is 1 is climate, 2 is land shape, 3 is water, 4 is farm roads, 5 is farm trees, 6 is farm buildings, 7 is subdivision fencing, and 8 is soil. So his thesis was that soil was soil fertility on a farm was the most impermanent thing that there was. You could either lose it very quickly, or you could get it very quickly through good management, right? Whereas the climate that we have, the climatic weather patterns, or the pattern of weather is permanent, as is the terrain and so on. So I got all of that. And then I thought, well, I'll pay homage to Yeoman's genius by putting on economy, because I thought these days you can change your economy quite quickly by going on a Facebook marketplace and selling everything, for example.
Yeah.
Or you can start up a website very quickly. You can go onto Shopify and open up a farm produce website very quickly. So you can change your economy probably faster than you can improve your soils on an agricultural scale. And then I thought energy. Well, energy is there's nothing faster than energy. There's nothing and I looked at it, there's nothing as fleeting as a photon of sunlight. and sunlight is what drives everything, right? So I put it in that frame, and then I shifted it as a planner. I don't think in factors, I think in layers. So planning is all about layers, right? And so I started to talk about it, and then I called it the Regen 10. Was my first. So the concept and the system, I suppose, came before the name. And anyway, I called it the Regen 10, and then I came up with the term regrarians, which is an amalgam of regenerative or reboot agriculture, or agrarian, and away we went. And the Regrarians platform, I tried not to make all about the scale of permanence, because while that's important, I saw that the complexity of agriculture being around social issues, economic issues, and environmental issues, that you're trying to get some cohesiveness between all of them. And so I looked at and trying to manage that complexity. So I looked at the platform as being more about, say 80% checklist and 20% scale of permanence. Certainly important to understand the relative permanence of different elements of what you're building in infrastructure, in particular, that you're building into the landscape. That's something I also did eventually. I started to actually consider the layers in groups. So I looked at the climate and geography layer as I made it. So I went from landscape, yeoman's landscape, to our geography, because it's a much broader word. And it translates better. Like if you got geografía in Spanish, or and so on.
Yeah.
So so I looked at those as being what I call constitutional or foundational layers. You can't do much about the climate, really, as an individual. You can certainly change the microclimate a bit, and you can build infrastructure, and you can place things to overcome, to a degree, the climate. You can improve the soil so it has more carbon and more water in it, and so on. But you still only get the amount of rain that comes out of the sky, and the amount of heat that comes out of the sun, depending on where you are. So, and the landforms that you have are what you have. You have to do a lot of earth moving to change the shape of the landforms. And where you're situated, the geography of where you're situated, in connection to any markets and labour and so on. So I looked at those as being constitutional, foundational. And then I thought, well, there's a whole bunch of layers which are what we call infrastructure layers. So these are the layers where you're doing something, where you're building something. So water, we're building water systems. I went to access from farm roads, because we are building access into our farms, roads and tracks and pathways and headlands and offsets and all sorts of things. And then we've got ecosystems, not farm trees. We're building ecosystems. So we're planting trees and shrubs and all sorts of things. And then we've got fences, which we're building. And then we're building energy systems. When we look at the energy layer, well, we're building solar panels and turbines and battery systems and cables and all of that sort of thing that make up that part of the energy generation and storage in a farm system. And then I went, well, what about management? Where does management fit? And management, the two management layers from our perspective are the soils layer and the economy layer. They're both strongly about how one manages it. So I suppose it's a bit of an insight into the compartmentalization that my own approach to managing complexity, and the way that a lot of people try and do that, while recognizing that these systems are very complex, and but that shouldn't stop you from trying to be organized, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting approach, and it may sound complex for those who don't know about it, but I think in a system is how you approach your farm, how it takes you through a way of thinking about your farm, thinking about where are things happening. And as you go through the system, if you start from the climate, you're really understanding where your farm is, what are the, let's say, what is it? What are the main aspects of the climate that you're going to be dealing with? And the same happens with geography. But then you get into water, which is really important for design. And many farms have a lack of management of water. So you either have an
Yeah.
excess of water, or you're not moving the water enough if you have too much, or you're actually not storing the water or keeping the rainwater, even if it's not a lot of it. And I also like how access for you, roads and tracks are also part of the water system in a way. It helps you move or guide water.
Well, that was an interesting part of it when I started to rationalize in this way that, none of the layers are distinct. There's always crossover.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and that was when I look at a lot of designs that we've done or farm plans that we've done, the access layer, I would say, often becomes a bit more permanent than in how it's developed than, say, the water. See, so much of water these days is piping. It's not like in Yeoman's day or previously where we, to carry water previously,
Yeah.
we used to build channels. Everywhere around the world built channels, whether it was a Sakia or races or leats or whatever they were.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I meant, the scale of permanence thing started to I started to go, well, look, don't put limits on your creativity here. It's more important that we think about being integrated, and there's the checklist part. I should just also add that the other element of the climate layer, which is quite permanent, is what we call the climate of the human mind. And that was when I was rationalizing how to embed some of the different psychological thinkings, religious thinkings, although I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but belief systems, let's put it that way. I mean, if you are, in the context of this discussion, if you're a biodynamic farmer, well, you've decided to become a biodynamic farmer, and you probably describe yourself as a biodynamic farmer. Well, what does that mean psychologically, and how strongly do you hold that belief? And probably most people who are biodynamic farmers, it's something that actually clearly defines them. So I look at that as a climate factor. How you define yourself, and how when you wake up in the morning and you think about what you're going to do each day. Well, what's that's defining you? And if you're a biodynamic farmer, you're that. If you're a holistic management devotee, or let's say, or practitioner, it's going to be that. If you're a permaculturalist, it's going to be that. So, or if you're a Catholic, it's going to be that. Or a Muslim, you're going to be that. There's all of these things which our mind really drives, and I think they belong from a permanence perspective in the climate layer.
Yeah, even if it's a subtle climate that you generate by your beliefs around your farm.
Yeah, exactly. It drives everything else that happens thereon. Yes,
absolutely. And one of the things that is I think really interesting about your work is that you've been able to bring this consciousness of project design and on Keyline and the way you look at design, which is very relevant. You've been able to bring it to different parts of the world. And I wanted to ask you if you can give us some examples of maybe some of the projects that were relevant to you, maybe because you've worked in the tropics, you've worked in the desert, you've worked in Europe, in many parts of the world. And it would be interesting because a lot of the listeners of this podcast come from different regions, and they might be thinking, oh, maybe this does not apply. I mean, there's very small scale farmers, and then you have huge scale farmers like you do in Australia and certain parts of the world. Would you be able to give us a few examples of what you found out there in the world and how this design system has been able to transform farms?
Yeah, that's it. Listening to you made me realize that a lot of, I was talking about this yesterday in our Rex program, a lot of because we just started our 16th online Rex program, our 14-week farm planning program yesterday. And
Wow.
I was talking about the difference between management and development. And so I think your question was leading to what do we do as developers, as farm developers, the development of infrastructure. And I think that, I know that over the period since we developed the Agrarians platform, even though that gave us a really strong platform to design infrastructure, as a result of our inclusion and embrace of holistic management, we've actually done a lot less development work since 2011 than we had done previously. So what I mean by that is, as a result of the influence of holistic management, we have considered the role of infrastructure development on profitability and on impacting the overall context of the humans involved. And as a result, we have been a lot more elegant, let's say, in what we have done from an infrastructure perspective than what we perhaps were before. I think humans really love to build things, particularly men. It makes them, I think you build something, if you build a stone wall, and you look back at the end of the day, I think that's one of the earliest forms of a dopamine hit. You get, apart from the other forms of, you get a feeling of achievement, right?
Yeah.
And these days, dopamine is almost is almost pathological thanks to social media.
Yeah.
But we have gone, so when to your question, when we've gone around the world, particularly since 2011, which is the majority of the work that we've done, has been trying to show people how to do infrastructure within their economic limits, within the scope of trying to get a return on investment, and that less is more, and focus a lot more, because what we see all the time is that people would rather buy a tool or build something than actually change their management practices, right? And we see management practice as being more important, not always, but in most cases, management practices are more important to change than building new infrastructure. Infrastructure should support the change of management, not the other way around. That's the way. So as a result, when you ask me to highlight, grand designs, let's say, I know they're not your words, but then I'd actually say it's not that impressive. And I keep saying this to people, a lot of what we do is not something you'd put on an Instagram post because it's boring. It's like, how much can you do about Instagram of more grass or increased landscape function or better infiltration? It doesn't make a good Instagram. It's not something you're going to shout at. Well, I think it does depend, but people would rather, if you look at this from a water perspective, people get very excited about making incisions in the earth and going, hey, look at my new swale or my new contour or my new dam or la-di-da. And people go, oh, good on you, right? Yeah. And they like, right? Or pat you on the back. And whereas if you just increase the basal area of grasses and increase the perenniality of your ecosystem, it's not as stark and visible as a change. But I would say it's much more powerful as a change and potentially enduring as a change, as opposed to an earthwork intervention. Or a fence, or different things. So, even like one of the biggest things that we've, from an infrastructure perspective that we have influenced is strategic earthworks, especially in terms of water infrastructure. So, building dams in particular positions and landscape, and only the number of dams that are actually required rather than what are speculated to be necessary, and water pipeline systems, which themselves are buried and invisible, and only emerge where you've got a hydrant. So and then fencing that's extremely lightweight. Most of our work is with livestock systems. Um, because most farms are not mixed anymore, unlike the great biodynamic farms. I've got a book, I should have grabbed it there, on biodynamics, which is it's around the corner. I can't remember the title, but at the start of this book, it goes through and says, these are all of the things that make up that a biodynamic farm should have as a whole organism. And it's a mixed farm. And mixed farming is very unpopular these days. Agriculture has become much more simplistic. It's either you grow plants or you grow animals. You don't grow both. And the law in some countries even makes it difficult to have animals and plants that you produce and sell grow together. So it's become quite crazy. But yeah, it's what we call big M management over small d development is where we've really gone with things, which reduces the time and the energy and effort and investment that people have to put into it. Changes in management is much cheaper and generally has a much higher profitability in terms of return on investment than developing things.
Yeah. I think what I was thinking about when I asked you the question is more than, the brightest or the most shiny projects. I was thinking, how does it look to design something in the desert? It doesn't matter the scale, if it's huge or very small. And then, and how do you dialogue with this in the tropics or in temperate zones? And I find it that a lot of people, when designing farms, think of different aspects of the farm, but sometimes we forget about the principles like you bring with simple things as fencing that become really relevant, or how you manage your water. And for a farmer, definitely when you're moving cattle or when you have flooding in torrential rains, if you have a good farm design, this will make it a huge difference that may not be a perfect post for Instagram, but it definitely changes your view of reality when you're able to manage a storm in your farm, or when you're able to manage a drought season, when you've been able to plan your fields with a key line where you're actually planting water in your field and retaining humidity longer. And so these are things that are very relevant. And what I found out when I was able to collaborate with some of your students is that these conversations between design and good agricultural practices and biodynamics and holistic management, all of this together brings really innovative farms. And one of the things about your design is that it brings a lot of technology. I think you have a very good relationship with technology. You take the best of what's available today without being dependent on it 100%, but at the same time you are technology friendly in a way that is relevant for today. There are things that the keyline design benefits from drone flights and other ways of looking at landscape that are so relevant. And what I found in your design is that you are really a good mix of sound agricultural practices with good use of technology, and I would say very good design. And when you go from zero to your farm design and it is quite relevant. It doesn't matter the scale. I've been able to work in smaller scales, and it's also very relevant what you could do with design. I think the reality is different in different countries. Sometimes farms in Europe have been farms for more than 1,000 years, and even sometimes in one family. And in other places, there's a lot of young people who are beginning from zero. They don't have farmers in their family, close relatives, and they're still out there. So design for me is incredibly relevant, and that's why I wanted to bring your perspective on it and how you work with it, because it would be very nice to collaborate and work together in these projects. It's important.
Yeah, I think to your question again, capability is a really big thing, and it's another context. So there's the landscape's capability, which is afforded to it, and the capability of being able to produce different forms of biomass, which is more or less what agriculture is about. Um, and then the capability of the humans that are involved, their economic capability, and so on. So when one goes through a design springs from the analysis of capability, let's say, and once you go through that process of analysis, then that should have you consider opportunities for improvement, infrastructure improvement, which is going to enhance the capabilities, while also considering the management changes that can improve capability. And generally, if we're looking at those situations, whether it's the hardest of landscapes, the deserts, and so on, it tends to be that there is strategic infrastructure, but there's even more strategic management, because the capability of those landscapes afforded by that climate provides, well, it's like any species that lives in deserts. They are all generally opportunistic. Now, can we evolve that system over time by our interventions so that the resilience, that more resilience, systemic resilience gets built in, mostly from the perspective of the ecosystem resilience. So if we look at a lot of deserts of the world, they've been destroyed. They've had various human interventions which have destroyed the ecosystem. And in desert ecosystems, it's very easy to set them back a long way. I mean, I know, having been in the south of the south of Spain a lot, in Andalusia, there's areas which the Phoenicians 3,000 years ago impacted, and they're still impacted today, right?
Yeah.
So because they're dry landscapes take a much longer time to recover, as what Alan Savory would call part of what he calls the brittleness scale. Drier landscapes are more brittle, and when they recover from interventions, and they are rested, biodiversity tends to decrease. Whereas if you're in Germany or northern France or places like that, which are quite humid, or Switzerland, when you have an intervention, nature comes back even stronger, right?
Yeah.
But doesn't do that in dry places. So management, therefore, becomes, well, it's important everywhere, but it becomes even more important to try and rebuild the systemic, ecosystemic resilience that you or someone else has destroyed or impacted negatively. I'm working on a place in Morocco at the moment, Gita. I posted about it the other day. And Gita's bought this property. It's about 2 hectares in the middle of nowhere. It's in sight of the Atlas Mountains. I love Morocco. Morocco, to me, is one of those places where you can just see, you think, man, if I was the king, because they have a king, and it's an absolute monarchy. There's not many of them. And you often think, well, what would it be like if you were king? What would I do if I was the king of Morocco, with a sort of a agricultural focus?
Yeah.
And anyway, I do that in my own little way with Gita. And I said, Gita, build a fence around your landscape, because in the context of Morocco, you grow a cereal crop in winter because it's a winter rainfall place. And then in summer, everyone's animals just maraud the landscape, so nothing grows. It's picking the meat off the bone, and every year that goes by, the landscape is just further and further degrading. So I said to the Gita, the first thing that I would do, and this is the advice I've given to so many people in Morocco, build a fence around your property, because you cannot allow the free marauding of all of these animals onto your place if you're going to try and see it systemically improve, because they'll eat everything. They're all hungry. So we grew a mixed species. She got a neighbour's donkey, ploughed the soil, and grew a mixed species cover crop, and it's grown up really well. Now she's going to get her elderly neighbour's 70 goats. She's going to make some temporary fencing, and she's going to graze those cover crops and then rest it over the summer. She'll leave some residual behind and then come back next autumn, later this year, and we'll repeat it. Hopefully we'll do it with a no-till drill instead of using a plough, because we don't want to expose all of that carbon that she's built by inverting using a plough. Anyway, so we're going to do that. So that's an example of what we advise people so often, is have this balance between good management and sometimes exclusion of other species, so that we can actually manage the evolution and the succession to get more systemic, ecosystemic resilience. Because if you don't do that, it just won't happen. And it's and then that's frustrating and disheartening, and then people will stop, and that's no good. We don't want people to stop. We want people and their systems to keep getting better, and then it becomes an oasis. And there's that whole concept of, well, if people look over the fence, then they'll change too. I've not seen too much evidence of that, but the prophet in their own land doesn't seem to go too well.
Exactly.
And even in Genesis,
Yes.
the Lord is always sending people away. Yeah.
Well, Darren, I think with this last example, you really showed us, even to the smallest farm, how good management and good planning and farm design is very relevant. And that's, I think, what I want you to bring. I would ask you one last question before finishing.
Mhm.
How would you convince somebody, or how would you invite somebody to consider farm design? What would you say to a young farmer and saying, I would consider farm design because what does it bring?
Well, that's a good question. I think, well, let's go back to the start. I mean, look at the farm as a whole ecosystem, which is the biodynamic principle, and but then an ecosystem is never isolated. We are part of one giant global Gaia ecosystem, right? So,
Yeah.
and as you said before, if you get flooding, you may have the best farm in the world, and you may have the best water cycle in the world, but it might be a small place which is in a watershed, and everyone else around you is not practicing good agriculture or good land management, and so the flooding will still impact you. Maybe you can mitigate that, but yeah. So I think we have to. Design is centered on the acknowledgement on the analysis of where we are, and that design is not just looking at the landscape design, it's also looking at how our economy is, our personal or enterprise economy is designed, and how our personal life is designed. And we have to consider all of those things, I think, in order to be able to then go, okay, what interventions am I going to have as part of the next step of this design? Or improvements, and they may be management interventions, and they may be infrastructure interventions. So I think it's if you buy a new business, let's say you buy a cafe, And you buy a building which you want to make a cafe. That's what a lot of people do. Well, you go in there, you understand yourself, what you are going to do in that cafe. You look at the space and you go, all right, this is the space I'm going to build everything into. And you look at the money that you expect to be able to make out of it. It's no different. You do that. People do that all the time. When it comes to agriculture is sort of like this special, very individualistic, very fraught industry overall, where a lot of the things that we have learned as best practice outside of agriculture, such as I just explained, are not done in agriculture. And it's about time it was, because the benefits of being able to use these methods to consider your capabilities, to analyze what the problems are, and therefore what the opportunities are, and what the threats, the SWOT analysis type of thing, is a design process. A business plan is a design process. A infrastructure plan for a landscape has a design process. Design leads to a plan, which leads to outcomes, and that's and hopefully what you design, if it's cautious enough, if it understands that especially with the environment, that you're more likely to be wrong than right when you do things, that will undermine the arrogance or hubris that some people bring to what they do. I think humility in design is, especially when it comes to ecosystems, is definitely something that is lacking. And I think that's what we encourage again. That's that management versus development sort of thing. That's about you being humble, because, and there's a lack of humility, I think, across the world, but and we're encouraged as peoples these days to not be humble. But that lack of humility, well, I would say, leads to a lack of humus, and it's to play on words. But that's, if you're trying to be humble, that means, you're not going to do anything, or humbleness, humility is not being meek. Humility is where you are taking the time that your life and your landscape deserves to then to make changes. It's not about being arrogant and moving ahead really quickly, or being meek and not doing anything at all. It's about establishing your power, and that's I suppose what we want everyone. We want. If you look at what really motivates me, it's about anybody realizing that as long as they have the blessing of breath and life, then it's up to them how they will express themselves, and that expression is something that is up to you, how you will express yourself. And design is, even that is a way, is a means of saying, well, you can change the way you express yourself.
That's very beautiful. Well, Darren, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's a great introduction into project design, into the way you look at it and you bring it to the world. And thank you for sharing with us your ideas, your knowledge, and your experience. And we'll be in contact, definitely. Collaboration is always a possibility, and I would really like to keep this connection going.
Thank you. Same.